The relentless sun, a brutal eye in the vast cerulean sky, beat down mercilessly on the cracked earth of the American West. A lone rider, Silas, a man whose face was etched with the lines of countless sunrises and sunsets on the frontier, squinted against the shimmering heat haze. His duster coat, a second skin of faded canvas, was caked with the fine red dust of 1,000 lonely miles, flapping softly like a tired flag in the sparse, hot breeze. Silas wasn't out here in pursuit of the glittering promise of gold, nor the fleeting glory of a quick draw. He was a man of quiet purpose, driven by an unspoken code, drifting from one forgotten dusty settlement to the next. More often than not, he found himself inextricably drawn into the silent struggles of those less fortunate, those cast adrift in this unforgiving landscape. His horse, Rusty, a sturdy bay mare with a surprising turn of speed when needed, kicked up small, transient clouds of dust with each steady, rhythmic hoofbeat. For what seemed like an eternity, the only sound for miles around was the rhythmic creak of worn leather from Silas's saddle and the distant plaintive cry of a lone hawk, circling lazily high above, a silent sentinel over the emptiness. Suddenly, Silas reined in Rusty, the horse coming to a halt with an accustomed sigh. His keen eyes, sharpened by years of solitary vigilance on the boundless plains, had caught something unusual, glinting amidst the parched scrubland and dry, cracked earth. He dismounted with practiced ease, his movements fluid despite the long hours in the saddle, and knelt down, his gloved hand brushing aside a clump of brittle grass. There, nestled in the ochre soil, lay a spent bullet casing, its brass still warm, betraying its recent discharge. A .44 caliber. A familiar, unsettling frown creased his weathered brow, deepening the lines around his eyes. This wasn't the kind of shot a hunter would take. It felt different, imbued with a frantic, desperate energy. He scanned the immediate area, his gaze sharp and methodical. Another casing, then another glinting like scattered jewels, leading off into the sparse, thorny scrubland. A cold, tightening knot of unease began to form in the pit of his stomach. Bullet casings, out here in the desolate expanse, almost universally signaled trouble in this untamed, lawless land, and rarely was it the good kind. Silas mounted Rusty once more, his hand instinctively falling to the familiar worn grip of his own Colt revolver holstered at his hip. He followed the silent metallic trail of brass, each glinting shell a cryptic breadcrumb in what he knew, without a shadow of a doubt, was a dangerous and unfolding game. The tracks were faint, almost imperceptible to an untrained eye, leading away from what clearly appeared to be the site of a very recent skirmish. The air, though still and heavy with heat, seemed to hum with the lingering, oppressive tension of conflict, a ghost of the violence that had just transpired. He could almost visualize the scene in his mind's eye, the sharp, echoing crack of gunfire ripping through the silence, the frantic rush of terrified bodies, the desperate, brutal struggle for survival. Whoever had fired these shots, or more importantly, whoever they were aimed at, was undeniably in a desperate, life-threatening situation. He felt a familiar, almost irresistible pull, a deeply ingrained sense of duty that he found utterly impossible to ignore. The ominous trail led him deeper into the desolate, sun-baked landscape, each discarded bullet shell a silent, grim promise of the turmoil and danger that lay ahead, drawing him further into the unknown. The scattered trail of spent bullet casings, like a sinister breadcrumb path, eventually intersected with a set of fresher footprints, small, almost delicate, yet uneven and deeply pressed into the loose soil. They spoke of haste, of someone running, or perhaps someone injured. Silas dismounted again, his gaze intent, his sharp eyes scrutinizing the subtle indentations in the dust. They appeared, unmistakably, to belong to a woman, and judging by their pronounced depth and the drag marks accompanying them, she was likely carrying a significant weight or perhaps supporting someone else. His concern, already a heavy weight in his chest, deepened considerably. A wounded woman, possibly alone, fleeing from the same shadowy figures who had fired those shots, the image painted a grim, chilling picture in his mind. He proceeded on foot for a short distance, Rusty patiently following his lead, her head low, accustomed to Silas's meticulous pace. As he moved alongside the faint prints, he noticed a distinct, faint drag mark in the dust beside the footprints, as if something heavy and cumbersome was being pulled along the ground, creating a continuous furrow in the otherwise undisturbed earth. Mounting Rusty once more, Silas urged the horse into a slightly faster, more determined pace. The relentless sun, now high above, intensified the oppressive heat, turning the very air into a tangible weight and casting long, distorted shadows that stretched like skeletal fingers across the parched, cracked earth. The landscape offered little in the way of cover, just scattered dry clumps of sparse grass and the occasional stunted, gnarled bush, their leaves curled and brittle from the sun. He kept a vigilant eye on the horizon, his gaze sweeping constantly, searching for any telltale sign of movement, a distant cloud of dust that might betray approaching riders, the sudden, agitated flight of birds, anything that might indicate the presence of others in this vast emptiness. The silence of the plains was unnerving, an almost oppressive blanket broken only by the rhythmic, steady thud of Rusty's hooves against the hard ground and Silas's own measured, even breathing. It was the kind of silence that veterans of the frontier knew all too well, the kind that often preceded violence, a suffocating calm before a storm. After what felt like another long, arduous hour, the faint drag mark became notably more pronounced, and Silas's keen eyes spotted a crucial detail, a discarded piece of cloth caught on the sharp thorns of a scrubby mesquite bush. He dismounted again, carefully plucking the scrap from the thorny branch. It was a fragment of faded blue calico, coarse and worn, the kind of material often used for women's simple everyday dresses. His apprehension, already a tangible presence, grew into a cold dread. He climbed back onto Rusty, urging the horse to push harder, the mare responding with a determined, steady stride, sensing the urgency in Silas's touch. The trail, now clearer and more defined, was unmistakably leading towards a cluster of low, rocky hills in the distance, offering the first real, substantial cover in miles. A silent prayer formed in Silas's mind. He hoped fervently that whoever he was following, this desperate woman, had managed to make it that far. The thought of a defenseless woman, and perhaps a child, cornered and vulnerable in this harsh, unforgiving landscape, spurred him onward with renewed urgency, overriding his own fatigue. As Silas and Rusty approached the foothills, the towering masses of sun-baked rock casting long, welcome shadows, Silas became even more cautious, his every sense heightened to an almost animalistic degree. He dismounted Rusty a second time, leaving the horse to graze patiently on a few stray tufts of grass, and proceeded on foot, his movements as silent and fluid as a desert cat. He used the sparse, thorny vegetation and the scattered boulders for cover, moving stealthily, his body low to the ground. The air here was still and thick, heavy with the scent of dry earth, sun-baked rock, and the faint, sweet aroma of desert sage. He moved slowly, methodically, his ears straining, listening intently for any sound beyond the whisper of the wind, the rustle of a startled lizard, the distant cry of a bird, or more ominously, human voices. A faint, almost imperceptible whimper carried on the breeze, a sound so soft it was almost swallowed by the vast echoing silence of the canyon. Silas froze instantly, his hand tightening instinctively on the worn grip of his revolver. There was no mistaking it now. It was the sound of a child crying, soft and heartbroken. He carefully, painstakingly, made his way around a massive, weather-worn boulder, its surface rough and pitted. He peered cautiously into a small, shaded hollow, a natural alcove carved into the rock face. His heart, usually as steady as a rock, clenched with a sharp, painful jolt at the sight that unfolded before him. A woman lay huddled on the dusty ground, her body curled protectively, her face pale and drawn, a mask of exhaustion and despair. Her eyes, wide and unfocused, were filled with a raw, primal fear. Clutched tightly in her trembling arms, pressed close to her breast, was a small child, its tiny face streaked with dried tears, its little body trembling uncontrollably. Beside them lay a makeshift pathetic bundle, likely containing their few salvaged possessions, a testament to their hurried, desperate flight. The woman looked incredibly weak and malnourished, her dress torn and covered in the gritty dust of the trail, a stark contrast to the strength he knew must have propelled her this far. As Silas approached slowly, his hands held open and slightly raised in a universal, unambiguous gesture of peace, the woman flinched violently, her body recoiling, her eyes widening with a fresh wave of alarm. Her grip on the child tightened, almost painfully. "Please," she whispered, her voice a mere rasp, hoarse and trembling from fear and thirst. "Please, don't hurt us." Silas knelt down slowly, ensuring his movements were non-threatening, his voice a calm, reassuring rumble, gentle, yet firm. "Ma'am, I'm not going to hurt you. My name's Silas. I was following some tracks and found you here. Are you all right? Are you hurt?" The woman hesitated for a long, agonizing moment, the fierce instinct of suspicion warring visibly with the overwhelming, desperate need for help in her tear-filled eyes. Then, as she met Silas's steady, honest gaze, seeing the genuine concern etched on his weathered face, she seemed to relax, a tiny, almost imperceptible sag in her shoulders. We were attacked," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper, choked with emotion. "Outlaws. They came to our farm. They took everything." Silas, moving with a gentle strength, helped the woman, who introduced herself as Sarah, slowly sit up against the cool rock face. He carefully checked her and the small child for any obvious injuries, his touch professional and respectful. The little one, a boy no more than 5 years old, clung desperately to his mother, his small body still trembling with the aftershocks of terror, his face buried in her tattered dress. Sarah, her voice a broken, strained whisper, began to explain the horrific events that had transpired. She spoke of their small, hard-won homestead on the fringes of civilization, a place of peace and simple dreams. She recounted how a gang of masked outlaws had descended upon them without warning, demanding money, food, and whatever valuables they possessed. Her husband, she recounted, had tried to defend them, to stand against the tide of their cruelty, but he... She couldn't finish the sentence, her voice cracking, swallowed by a wave of fresh, agonizing tears that streamed down her dust-streaked cheeks. Silas nodded grimly, his gaze softening with understanding. The unspoken tragedy was clear, its weight palpable in the air between them. They shot at us as we ran," Sarah continued, her voice gaining a desperate urgency as she relived the nightmare, her gaze distant and filled with the lingering horror of the memory. "I grabbed my son, Billy, and we just ran. We didn't stop. I don't know where they are now, or if they followed." She gestured weakly, her trembling hand indicating the direction from which they had come, a barren stretch of land now bathed in the harsh midday sun. Silas noticed a shallow, jagged wound on her left arm, just below the elbow, bleeding sluggishly, the dust clotted around the edges. It clearly needed attention. "We need to get that cleaned up, Ma'am," he said gently, his voice low and steady, radiating a calm assurance she desperately needed. He unhooked his canteen from his saddle and offered it to her. She drank gratefully, her throat working convulsively, the water a blessed relief, sharing a few precious drops with Billy, who gulped it down with surprising eagerness. As Sarah leaned back against the rock, allowing herself a moment of much-needed rest, Silas instinctively surveyed their immediate surroundings. The small hollow, while offering temporary shelter from the relentless sun and a modicum of privacy, was far from a secure haven. They were still exposed and vulnerable to discovery, especially if the outlaws decided to double back. He needed to assess the tactical situation, to weigh their meager options, and figure out their next crucial move. His gaze fell upon the frightened mother and her traumatized child, their faces pale and drawn, their vulnerability stark against the harsh landscape. A deep, unwavering resolve solidified within him. He wouldn't leave them here, not with the threat of those outlaws still looming. He would protect them, whatever the cost. The path forward was unclear, but one thing was certain: he was their only chance. If you're finding yourself deeply immersed in this gripping tale of survival and courage, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more captivating stories that unfold in the heart of the Old West. After Silas had tended to Sarah's wound as best he could, using a clean bandana and a small amount of antiseptic from his saddlebag, he listened more intently to her fragmented story. The sun had begun its slow descent, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, casting long, dramatic shadows across the canyon, but the emotional weight in the air remained heavy. Sarah spoke, her voice still raw with unspent grief, of a small, hard-won life on the vast, unforgiving prairie. She painted a vivid picture of her late husband's unwavering dreams for their future, of the humble homestead they had painstakingly built brick by brick, plank by plank, all of it now mercilessly shattered by the brutal, unprovoked intrusion of the masked outlaws. The raw, guttural pain in her voice was palpable, a heavy, suffocating weight that pressed down on the already stifling air. Billy, small and frail, nestled securely in his mother's arms, would occasionally let out a soft, heart-wrenching sob, a stark, agonizing reminder of their shared, traumatic ordeal and the life they had lost. Silas, a man not given to many superfluous words, a product of a life where actions spoke louder than any grand pronouncements, offered what comfort he could. His presence alone, a silent, unwavering promise of protection, seemed to be a balm to Sarah's frayed nerves. He learned that Sarah and Billy had been on their own for what felt like an eternity, 2 excruciating days and nights with little more than a few sips of water and an empty stomach, constantly haunted by the chilling fear of the masked men's inevitable return. The scattered bullet casings he had found earlier marked the very spot where Sarah, in a desperate, fleeting act of courage, had tried to slow their relentless pursuers, firing her husband's old, heavy revolver, the same .44 caliber that matched the casings Silas had discovered. Her raw courage, her sheer will to protect her son in the face of such overwhelming terror, was evident in every trembling word, a testament to the primal strength of a mother. As the afternoon wore on, the shadows lengthening and deepening, Silas knew with a grim certainty that they couldn't remain indefinitely in the exposed hollow. It offered temporary relief, but no long-term security. They needed to find a safer place, somewhere with a more reliable source of life-giving water, and perhaps even some natural shelter that could offer genuine concealment. After careful consideration, weighing the risks and the meager rewards, he decided their best, albeit dangerous chance, was to head towards the small, isolated town of Redemption, a few days' arduous ride to the west. It was a long and potentially perilous journey through untamed wilderness, but staying put was, in his experienced estimation, a death sentence. Their supplies were dwindling, and their vulnerability was increasing with every passing hour. Silas prepared for the grueling journey, assessing their meager supplies. Sarah had salvaged dried meat and a nearly empty water skin. Combined with Silas's few provisions, it was barely enough for a few days. He fashioned a sling for Sarah's wounded arm. Billy, though shaken, drew strength from his mother and Silas's quiet confidence. The decision to travel was not easy. Sarah was weak, and Billy was traumatized. The risk of encountering the outlaws again was ever present. However, Silas knew staying put was more dangerous, as they were exposed and without resources. The town of Redemption, a few days' ride west, offered the hope of safety, medical care, and possibly law enforcement. As the sun began to set, Silas helped Sarah onto Rusty, with Billy riding in front. Silas would lead the horse, walking beside them. It would be a slow, arduous journey, but they had to create distance from the attack site. Their survival depended on navigating the vast, untamed wilderness together, relying on each other's strength and resilience. The first day of their westward journey was an arduous test of endurance. The relentless sun beat down, and Sarah, weak and in pain, held Billy tightly as Rusty plodded along. Silas walked tirelessly beside them, constantly scanning the horizon for any threat. The intense heat and dwindling water supply were constant concerns, prompting frequent stops for meager sips from Silas's canteen. Despite his ordeal, Billy showed surprising resilience, often reaching out to touch Silas's leg, a silent gesture of trust. Sarah, though physically drained, remained fiercely determined to protect her son, speaking little but holding an unbreakable resolve in her tired eyes. As evening fell, they found a small, sheltered canyon to camp in. Silas built a low, smokeless fire for warmth and to deter predators, carefully avoiding drawing attention. He shared his remaining food with Sarah and Billy, accepting his own hunger. The vast, star-filled sky above emphasized their profound isolation. Silas kept a vigilant, sleepless watch throughout the cold night, his Colt revolver close at hand. The silence was broken only by Billy's occasional whimpers and the fire's gentle crackle. The immense responsibility for their safety rested heavily on Silas's shoulders. He knew the journey ahead was perilous, but was determined to see them safely through, no matter the personal cost. Their journey into the unknown is far from over, and the dangers of the Old West are ever present. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow their gripping progress and discover if they truly reach the elusive safety of redemption. Days merged into a grueling routine of riding, brief rests, and constant vigilance. Sarah's wound slowly healed, and her strength gradually returned with the small amounts of water and dried meat Silas provided. Billy, initially fearful, became more talkative, his youthful curiosity surfacing as he asked Silas about the stars and animals, seeking distraction from their hardships. Then, one scorching afternoon, as they crested a low ridge, Silas spotted a distinct line of green in the distance, the unmistakable sign of a river. Hope surged through their weary group. A river meant water, potentially fish, and a chance to wash away the grime. As they approached, the green line became a narrow, steadily flowing river lined with cottonwood trees, offering welcome shade. They made camp by the riverbank, relishing the sound of the flowing water. Silas caught fish, which they cooked, providing their first proper meal in days and significantly lifting their spirits. The river brought a profound sense of renewal. Sarah washed their clothes, and Billy splashed happily in the shallows, his laughter a welcome sound. For the first time since the attack, a fragile sense of peace settled over them, a brief reprieve from fear and hardship. Their precious respite by the tranquil river was tragically short-lived. One morning, while scouting, Silas found fresh, unmistakable horse tracks near the river's edge, several of them, including a distinctive horseshoe pattern he remembered from their ravaged homestead. A cold dread washed over him. The outlaws were still tracking them, closing in relentlessly. He rushed back to camp, his face grim. "We need to leave, now," he told Sarah urgently. "They're coming. I found their tracks." Sarah's face paled, fear returning intensely. They quickly packed their meager belongings, their newfound peace shattered by the chilling realization of imminent danger. Silas knew they had to move fast and desperately try to lose them in the rugged terrain beyond the river. They mounted Rusty and headed west again, pushing the tired horse harder. Silas constantly looked back, scanning for any sign of dust clouds or riders. The landscape became increasingly broken, a maze of rocky hills, deep ravines and narrow canyons, offering both potential hiding places and dangerous obstacles. As they navigated the treacherous paths, Silas grimly knew their chances of reaching redemption were dwindling. The outlaws were closing in, and he was rapidly running out of options. He understood, with grim clarity, that he had to make a stand to shield Sarah and Billy. The quiet cowboy who had stumbled upon their plight was now their last, solitary hope against the encroaching shadows of the unforgiving Old West. The inevitable confrontation finally came. The masked outlaws, 3 of them, caught up in a narrow, echoing canyon. Their menacing figures appeared abruptly, silhouetted against the harsh sunlight. "Thought you could just get away, did you, little lady?" one sneered. Silas dismounted, placing himself between Sarah and Billy and the outlaws, his body a shield. "Leave them alone," he said, his voice calm but firm, his hand resting on his revolver. The outlaws scoffed. "And who's gonna make us, old man?" Another taunted, leveling his rifle. A tense standoff ensued. Silas knew he was outnumbered, but wouldn't back down. He had promised to protect them. Shots suddenly rang out. Silas moved with surprising speed, his Colt barking twice, taking down one outlaw. But the others returned fire. Sarah, despite her fear, quickly shoved Billy behind a large rock for cover. The canyon became a deadly arena, thick with gun smoke. Silas fought fiercely, his movements precise, wounding another outlaw. But in the exchange, Silas himself took a bullet to the shoulder, a searing pain tearing through him. He grunted, staggering, but refused to fall. The final outlaw, seeing his companions incapacitated, broke bravado and fled. Silence fell over the canyon, broken only by Silas's ragged breathing. Sarah rushed to his side, her hands trembling over his bleeding shoulder, her eyes wide with gratitude and concern. They had survived against all odds, but the price of their safety, Silas knew, was high. Their journey to redemption, a distant dream, was not yet over. Thank you for embarking on this intense journey into the Old West. If you found yourself captivated by the struggles and triumphs of Silas, Sarah, and Billy, please subscribe to the channel for more compelling tales of courage, survival, and the human spirit against the backdrop of an untamed frontier.